The Driveway Rebellion. Mark Ellison had always liked the quiet of Willow Creek. The suburban neighborhood, with its neatly trimmed lawns and friendly waves, was a sanctuary after years in the city. He'd bought his modest two-story house 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of peace and a driveway big enough for his pickup truck. That driveway, gravel-edged and meticulously maintained, was his pride. Until the morning it wasn't. It was a chilly Tuesday in October when he first noticed it. Peering through his bedroom blinds, he saw a red sedan parked at the far end of his driveway. Not in front of his house, not on the street on his property. He frowned, assuming it was a mistake. Maybe a visitor had gotten lost. He pulled on a hoodie, slipped into his sneakers, and trudged outside, scribbling a note on a scrap of paper. "Please don't park here. Private property." He tucked it under the wiper and went back inside, expecting that to be the end of it. By noon, the sedan was gone. Mark shrugged it off and spent the afternoon tinkering in his garage, the incident already fading from his mind. But the next morning, he woke to find 2 cars, a silver minivan and a rusty blue pickup, parked side by side, blocking half his garage door. He stood there, coffee mug steaming in his hand, staring in disbelief. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was something else. Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people overstepped. Sure, there were the usual quirks, Mrs. Henderson's yappy dog, the annual debate over holiday lights, but nothing like this. Mark decided to give it one more day before making a fuss. Maybe it was a fluke, a coincidence. He scribbled another note, left it on the minivan, and went to work. The following morning shattered that hope. For cars, a black SUV, a dented hatchback, the rusty pickup, and a bright yellow convertible had commandeered his driveway like it was a public lot. Mark couldn't even get his truck out. He stood on his porch, breath fogging in the crisp air, his irritation boiling into something sharper. This was personal now. He knew who to talk to: Linda Grayson, the iron-fisted president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Linda was a neighborhood legend, and not in a good way. With her peroxide blonde bob and perpetually smug expression, she ruled the HOA like a petty dictator, issuing fines for unmowed lawns and sending emails about mailbox uniformity. Mark had mostly avoided her wrath, paying his dues on time and keeping his yard tidy. But this was war. He crossed the street to her house, a pristine colonial with flower boxes and a welcome mat that felt more like a warning. He knocked, shifting impatiently as the seconds ticked by. Finally, she cracked the door open, peering at him through the screen. "Yes, Mark," she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. "What's the problem?" "There are 4 cars in my driveway," he said, pointing across the street. "Any idea why?" Linda stepped onto her porch, arms crossed over her cardigan. "Oh, your driveway?" She tilted her head, her smirk widening. "It's a community parking lot now. Welcome to Willow Creek." Mark blinked, then laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "You're kidding, right? It's my property. I own it." She didn't laugh back. Her blue eyes locked onto his, cold and unwavering. "The HOA decided we need more parking. Your driveway's been empty half the time, so we voted to designate it for community use." "You got the notice." "Notice?" he sputtered. "What notice?" "No one told me anything." Linda reached inside, grabbed a photocopied flyer from a stack, and shoved it at him. It bore the HOA's oak tree logo and read, "Notice: all underutilized driveways are now designated for community parking effective immediately." Dated 3 days ago. "This is ridiculous," Mark said, waving the paper. "You can't take my driveway because I'm not parked there 24/7. It's mine." Linda shrugged, her smirk unshaken. "If you're not using it, it's fair game." "Don't be selfish, Mark. The community needs this." "Selfish?" He crumpled the flyer in his fist. "I've lived here 3 years, paid my dues, kept to myself. Now I'm selfish because strangers are parking on my land." She turned back to her door. "Take it up with the HOA if you're so upset." The screen slammed shut behind her. Mark stood there, fuming, as the reality sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power grab, and Linda Grayson was behind it. Over the next few days, Mark tried to make sense of it. He pulled out his property deed, a yellow document from the county clerk, and read it line by line. The driveway was indisputably his. No easements, no shared access clauses. He scoured the HOA website, a clunky relic from the early 2000s, and downloaded the bylaws. 50 pages of legalese later, he still couldn't find anything justifying Linda's claim. But he wasn't a lawyer, and doubt gnawed at him. Maybe he'd missed something. Meanwhile, the cars kept coming. Each morning brought a new lineup, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, sprawling across his gravel like an unwelcome car show. He started taking photos, documenting license plates and timestamps, building a case he wasn't sure how to use yet. Neighbors glanced his way as they walked their dogs, but no one said anything. It was as if they were afraid to get involved or already knew something he didn't. Friday morning, he caught a break. A guy in a flannel shirt climbed out of the rusty pickup, stretching like he owned the place. Mark strode over, his patience long gone. "Hey," he called. "Why are you parking here?" The guy glanced at him, then chuckled. "HOA said it's cool, man. Talk to them." He hopped in his truck and peeled out, leaving Mark with nothing but exhaust fumes and a growing suspicion. That evening, Mark sat at his kitchen table, staring at the flyer Linda had given him. Underutilized driveways. The phrase stuck in his craw. His truck was there half the time. Work kept him on the road, but that didn't make his property a free-for-all. He typed up an email to the HOA board, keeping it civil but firm. "I never agreed to this. My driveway is private property. Please explain the legal basis for this decision." He hit send, expecting at least a response. Nothing came. Not that night, not the next day. By Sunday, the invasion hit a new peak, 6 cars, bumper to bumper, blocking his entire garage. He couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his keys and drove to the community clubhouse, where the HOA held its monthly meetings. If Linda wouldn't answer his email, he'd make her face him in person. The clubhouse was a squat brick building with peeling paint and a flickering sign that read, Willow Creek Community Center. Inside, a dozen folding chairs faced a podium where Linda stood, flanked by Tom, a balding retiree with a clipboard, and Susan, a nervous-looking mom clutching a water bottle. A handful of neighbors sat scattered around, flipping through agendas. Mark waited until Linda called for new business, then stood. "I want to talk about my driveway," he said, voice steady despite the eyes on him. "People have been parking there every day, and I never agreed to it being community property." Linda sighed, a theatrical huff. "Mark, we voted on this. Your driveway's underutilized, so it's been reassigned. Majority rules." "When was this vote?" he pressed. "I wasn't there. No one told me." She waved a hand. "It was announced. You should have paid attention." Tom piped up, adjusting his glasses. "It's in the minutes from last month. You didn't object then, so it's done." "I didn't object because I didn't know," Mark said, his voice rising. "You can't take my property without my consent." Linda smirked. "Take it up with the city if you're so upset." Meeting adjourned. She banged a gavel. Where did she even get that? And the room cleared out, leaving Mark alone, his anger simmering. Word count, 2,100 words in part 1, continuing to 3,000. He drove home, the flyer crumpled in his passenger seat. Linda's dismissal stung, but it lit a fire under him. If the HOA wouldn't listen, he'd find another way. He spent the night researching property laws, HOA regulations, anything that might give him an edge. The deeper he dug, the more he realized this wasn't just about parking. Linda was playing a game, and he was the unwilling pawn. Monday morning, he woke to a new low. A white SUV sat dead center in his driveway, blocking his garage completely. No note, no warning, just a hulking obstacle trapping him in his own home. He grabbed his phone and dialed the tow company, his hands shaking with fury. "Big Mike's Towing," a gruff voice answered. "I need a car towed from my driveway," Mark said. "It's private property, and it's blocking me in." "Address." Mark gave it, and the guy promised a truck within the hour. He paced his kitchen, waiting, his coffee growing cold. This was his line in the sand. But before the tow truck arrived, Linda appeared. She marched up his walkway, arms crossed, her cardigan flapping like a cape. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. "Towing this car," Mark said, pointing at the SUV. "It's on my property." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh no, you don't. This is community space now. You can't tow a legally parked vehicle." "Legally parked?" he shouted. "This is my driveway. You don't decide what's legal." She pulled out her phone, smirking. "We'll see about that." She dialed, spoke in hushed tones, and minutes later, Mark's tow request was canceled. He called Big Mike's back, incredulous. Sorry, man, the guy said. Got a call from someone claiming it's HOA business. We can't touch it. Mark stared at Linda, still standing there, triumphant. How is this possible? He demanded. You can't override my rights. She shrugged. Take it up with the HOA. Then she turned and strutted off, leaving him trapped and seething. That was it. Mark wasn't just mad, he was done. If Linda wanted a fight, she'd get one. He went inside, grabbed his laptop, and started planning. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. It was about justice. Word count, 3,000 words for part 1. Mark trudged back to his house, the crumpled deed still clutched in his hand. Linda's dismissal echoed in his ears, her smug indifference fueling a fire he hadn't felt in years. He'd moved to Willow Creek for peace, not to be a doormat for some HOA tyrant. The 7 cars in his driveway mocked him as he squeezed past, their headlights glinting like eyes in the dusk. He slammed his front door shut, the sound reverberating through the empty house, and vowed to fight back. The next morning, he woke to the same chaos, 6 cars this time, but no less infuriating. He snapped more photos, his phone's gallery filling with evidence of the invasion. He tried a new tactic, posting on the Willow Creek Facebook group. Anyone know why my driveway is suddenly a parking lot? HOA says it's community property now. This can't be legal. He attached a picture of the latest lineup, a black SUV, the yellow convertible, and a new addition, a boxy green van with a dented fender. Responses trickled in, mostly sympathetic but useless. That's crazy, Mark, wrote Mrs. Henderson. Linda's gone too far, chimed Mr. Patel, though he added, I'm staying out of it. A few others liked the post, but no one offered solutions. Then Susan, the HOA's jittery secretary, commented, it was voted on. Check the minutes. Mark gritted his teeth. The vote again. He replied, where's the notice? I never saw it. Susan didn't respond. He spent the day at work distracted, his mind churning. He managed a small hardware store downtown, a steady job that kept him on his feet and out of the house most weekdays. It explained why his driveway sat empty sometimes, Linda's underutilized excuse, but that didn't make it fair game. By evening, he was back home, staring at the cars again. The green van's owner, a lanky guy with a goatee, climbed out as Mark approached. Hey, Mark called, keeping his tone civil. Why are you parking here? The guy shrugged, slinging a backpack over his shoulder. Lady from the HO said it's open for anyone. I live 2 streets over. Street parking's a nightmare. It's my driveway, Mark said, pointing to his house. Private property. Goatee guy hesitated, then sighed. Look, man, I don't make the rules. She told me it's cool. He hurried off, leaving Mark with nothing but frustration. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. Headlights swept through his bedroom as cars came and went, their engines rumbling like a taunt. He sat up, grabbed his laptop, and dug into the HOA bylaws again. The document was a slog paragraphs about fence heights, paint colors, and pet restrictions, but nothing about seizing driveways. He found a vague clause about community assets, but it required owner consent. Linda was bluffing, or worse, breaking her own rules. He emailed the board again, this time copying every member he could find, Linda, Tom, Susan, and a few names he barely recognized. I've reviewed the bylaws, he wrote. There's no provision for taking my driveway without my agreement. I demand this stop, or I'll escalate it. He hit send, a small victory in a losing battle. The next day, he got a reply, not from Linda, but Tom. Mark, the decision stands. Meeting minutes are posted online. Attend the next session if you have concerns. Mark clicked the link Tom included, a clunky HOA site with a minutes section. He scrolled to last month's entry. Motion to designate underutilized driveways as community parking passed, 5-0. No details, no notice date, no proof he'd been informed. It was a sham. He checked the Facebook group again. Buried under a thread about lost cats, he found it, a single post from Linda at 3:12 a.m., dated 3 weeks ago. HOA meeting tomorrow, 7 p.m. Agenda, parking solutions. No mention of his driveway, no follow-up. It was designed to be missed. Rage simmered in his chest. This wasn't incompetence, it was deliberate. By midweek, the invasion hit a fever pitch. 8 cars crammed into his driveway, some parked diagonally, their tires chewing up his gravel. He couldn't even mow his lawn without navigating a maze of metal. He called the non-emergency police line, hoping for clarity. Willow Creek PD, a bored voice answered. "Hi," Mark said. "People are parking on my driveway without permission. HOA says it's community property, but it's mine. Can you help?" The dispatcher paused. "If it's your property, you can tow them. But if the HOA's involved, it's a civil matter. We don't intervene unless there's a crime. So they can just take it?" Mark asked, incredulous. "Talk to a lawyer or the city." "Sorry, man." The line clicked dead. Mark slammed his phone down. The police were useless, the HOA was a brick wall, and Linda was untouchable. He spent the evening pacing, his mind racing for a solution. He couldn't live like this, trapped, ignored, violated. He needed a plan, something smarter than shouting at Linda's door. Friday night, he hit a breaking point. He came home late from work, exhausted, to find a massive gray SUV blocking his garage entirely. He couldn't even squeeze his truck onto the street. Every spot was taken by the overflow from his own driveway. He stood there, keys dangling, and felt the anger boil over. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about dignity. He grabbed his phone and dialed Big Mike's towing again. "I need a car towed." "Now." "Address?" the gruff voice asked. Mark gave it, pacing as he spoke. "It's blocking my garage. Private property." "Got it." "Truck's out in 30. Mark hung up, a grim satisfaction settling in. Let Linda try to stop him this time. But she did. 20 minutes later, as Mark watched from his porch, Linda stormed across the street, arms crossed, her cardigan flapping like a battle flag. "What are you doing?" she barked. "Towing this monstrosity," Mark said, pointing at the SUV. "It's my driveway." Her eyes narrowed. "This is community space. You can't tow a legally parked car." "Legally parked?" he shouted. "This is my property. You don't get to decide." She smirked, pulling out her phone. "We'll see." She dialed, spoke in hushed tones, and within minutes, Mark's tow request was canceled again. He called Big Mike's back, furious. "Sorry, dude," the guy said. "HOA lady called. Said it's their jurisdiction. Hands are tied." Mark stared at Linda, still standing there, victorious. "How are you doing this?" he demanded. "You can't just override me." She shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA." She turned and sauntered off, leaving him trapped and seething. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cold, and vowed to end this. Linda thought she'd won, but she'd underestimated him. He'd fight smarter, dig deeper, and turn her game against her. This was war. The gray SUV stayed in Mark's driveway all weekend, a hulking reminder of Linda's power. He couldn't move it, couldn't tow it, couldn't even get his truck out to run errands. He was a prisoner in his own home, and the helplessness gnawed at him. By Monday, he'd had enough. He took the day off work, called in a favor from his assistant manager, and dedicated himself to cracking Linda's scheme. He started with the cars. The same ones kept showing up: the black SUV, the yellow convertible, the rusty pickup, the green van. He'd seen the drivers enough to recognize patterns. The goatee guy from the van was a daily fixture, always parking around 7 a.m. The convertible woman appeared afternoons, usually with shopping bags. The pickup guy was sporadic but consistent. Mark grabbed a notebook and started logging them: times, plates, descriptions. If this was a racket, he'd prove it. Tuesday morning, he struck gold. He was sipping coffee by his kitchen window when the black SUV pulled in. A stocky man in a baseball cap climbed out, glanced around, and crossed the street to Linda's house. Mark watched, heart pounding, as the guy pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and handed it to Linda on her porch. She pocketed it casually, like it was routine, then waved him off. The SUV guy returned to Mark's driveway, climbed in, and drove away. Mark's jaw dropped. He fumbled for his phone, zooming in too late to catch the exchange, but the pieces clicked. This wasn't random parking. Linda was renting out his driveway, profiting off his property. He waited, camera ready, and caught it again the next day: the green van guy, slipping Linda a few bills. Then the pickup driver, same deal. It was a pattern, a scam, and Mark had her dead to rights. He spent the afternoon compiling evidence: photos, timestamps, notes. He printed everything, organized it in a folder, and felt a surge of triumph. This wasn't just HOA overreach, it was fraud. He'd take it to the next meeting, expose her in front of everyone, and watch her squirm. The meeting was Thursday night, back at the clubhouse. Mark walked in, folder under his arm, ready for battle. Linda stood at the podium, Tom and Susan at her sides. The usual crowd of neighbors slouched in chairs. He waited for new business, then stood. "I've got proof," he said, holding up the folder. "Linda's renting out my driveway. She's taking cash from these drivers and pocketing it. This isn't community parking. It's a racket." The room went silent. Linda's smirk flickered, but she recovered fast. "Mark, that's absurd. The community voted. You're just upset you lost." "Voted?" He shot back. "You posted a notice at 3 a.m. on Facebook. No one saw it. And this," he slapped a photo on the table, the SUV guy handing her cash. "This isn't a vote. It's theft." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tom cleared his throat. "Those are serious accusations, Mark. Do you have more than blurry pictures?" "I've got timestamps, plates, witnesses," Mark said. "She's making money off my property, and I never agreed to it." Linda laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, honey, you're delusional. If you don't like the rules, take it to the city." She banged her gavel. Meeting over. Neighbors filed out, some whispering, others avoiding his gaze. Mark stayed, staring Linda down. "This isn't over," he said. She smirked. "Good luck." Friday morning, the final straw dropped. Mark woke to find a red pickup, not the rusty one, a new one, parked diagonally across his driveway, blocking his garage and half his front walk. He couldn't even step outside without climbing over a bumper. He grabbed his phone, called Big Mike's again, and demanded a tow. "On it," the guy said. 15 minutes. Mark waited, pacing, until the tow truck rumbled up. But before the driver could hook the pickup, Linda appeared, arms crossed, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Stop right there," she called to the driver. "That's a legally parked car." The driver, a burly guy with a beard, paused. "This your property, ma'am?" "No," Mark snapped. "It's mine." "Tow it." Linda smirked. "It's community space. He can't touch it." She pulled out her phone, dialed, and within minutes, the tow was canceled again. The driver shrugged. "Sorry, man. HOA's call." Mark turned on Linda, his voice shaking. "You're insane. This is my home, and you're holding me hostage." She shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA." She strutted off, leaving him trapped and furious. That night, Mark sat at his table, evidence spread out, and realized he needed more than the HOA. He'd go to the city, the police, anyone who'd listen. Linda thought she'd won, but he'd fight dirty if he had to. This was his breaking point, and her reckoning. Mark spent the weekend plotting. The red pickup stayed, a taunting fixture, but he didn't call the tow company again. Linda's interference proved she had pull, more than she should. He needed leverage, something airtight. His evidence folder grew, more photos, a video of the green van guy handing Linda cash, a log of every car since Monday. It was damning, but not enough to topple her. He needed the HOA to crack. Monday, he called in sick and drove downtown to the county clerk's office. If Linda claimed his driveway was community property, there'd be a record, an easement, a filing, something. He waited in a fluorescent-lit room, flipping through car magazines, until a clerk handed him his property file. He spread it out on a table. Deed, survey, tax records. No easements, no HOA amendments. His driveway was his, plain and simple. He photocopied everything, adding it to his arsenal. Back home, he scoured the HOA bylaws again, cross-referencing with state law online. A forum post caught his eye. HOAs can't seize private property without consent or a recorded easement. Bingo. Linda was bluffing, or banking on him not fighting back. Tuesday, he caught another break. The convertible woman parked at noon, and Mark was ready. He strode out, phone recording audio in his pocket. "Hey," he said, casual. "Why do you keep parking here?" She glanced at him, annoyed. "The HOA lady, Linda," she said. "It's open. I pay her $10 a day. Saves me circling the block." "Pay her." Mark pressed, heart racing. "Cash." "Yeah. What's it to you?" She grabbed her bags and hurried off, but he had it. Her voice, her admission. He played it back, grinning. This was gold. He hit the next HOA meeting Wednesday night, armed to the teeth. The clubhouse buzzed with tension. Word of his last outburst had spread. Linda stood at the podium, smirking as he approached. "More whining, Mark," she said as he raised his hand. Facts, he replied, slapping his folder down. You're renting my driveway. I've got photos, video, a driver admitting she pays you $10 a day. This isn't community use, it's fraud. The room erupted. Neighbors leaned forward. Tom fidgeted with his clipboard. Linda's smirk vanished. That's slander, she snapped. Prove it. Mark played the audio, the convertible woman's voice crackling through his phone. I pay her $10 a day. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He held up photos. The SUV guy, the van guy, cash changing hands. This is my property, he said, waving the deed. You're stealing from me and pocketing the money. Linda recovered, her voice icy. The community voted. You're twisting things. Take it to the city if you're so sure. I will, Mark said. And I'll take this too. He tapped the folder. See you there. Neighbors whispered as he left, Linda's glare burning into his back. She'd underestimated him, and he'd shaken her grip. The fight was on. Thursday, he filed a complaint with the city zoning office. He sat across from a clerk named Janet, a tired woman with glasses perched on her nose, and laid out his case, deed, photos, audio, bylaws. She skimmed it, then shook her head. Sorry, she said. Your neighborhood's under HOA jurisdiction. We can't interfere unless it's a public violation. So they can steal my driveway? Mark asked, incredulous. It's private property, she said, but HOAs can set rules for community use. You'd need a lawyer. He stormed out, fists clenched. The city was a dead end, but Janet's words stuck. A lawyer. He'd need one, and soon. Linda wasn't just a bully. She was connected, untouchable. But he had proof, and he'd use it to bury her. Mark spent Friday reeling from the zoning office flop. He'd expected bureaucracy, not a brick wall. The HOA's power baffled him. How could a group of busybodies override his deed? He called a friend, Greg Harper, a lawyer he'd met through work. Greg specialized in small business disputes, not HOAs, but he'd know where to start. They met Saturday at a diner downtown, a greasy spot with cracked vinyl booths. Greg, a wiry guy with a mop of brown hair, slid into the seat across from Mark, sipping coffee as Mark dumped his folder on the table. Jesus, Mark, Greg said, flipping through photos. This is wild. She's running a parking hustle on your land. Yep, Mark said. And the city won't touch it. Says it's HOA turf. Greg frowned, scanning the deed. They're half right. HOAs can regulate common areas, but this, he tapped the survey, this is yours. No easement, no consent. She's got no leg to stand on. So why's the city backing off? Mark asked. Greg leaned back, sipping his coffee. HOAs are a gray area. Cities hate meddling unless it's blatant, like a health code mess. But this audio, he grinned. For taking cash? That's fraud. We can nail her. How? Mark pressed. She's got the HOA locked down. Civil suit, Greg said. Property rights violation, maybe theft. But first, dig deeper. If she's got city ties, we need proof. She's too smooth at shutting you down. Mark nodded, a plan forming. He'd watch her closer, tail her if he had to. Linda wasn't just a control freak. She had pull, and he'd find it. Sunday, he staked out her house from his porch, binoculars borrowed from Mr. Patel. The red pickup finally left, replaced by the black SUV. The cash guy showed up at noon, same routine, money to Linda, back to the driveway. But then something new. A sleek gray sedan pulled into Linda's driveway. A man in a suit climbed out, shook her hand, and went inside. They emerged 20 minutes later, laughing like old friends. Mark snapped photos, his gut twisting. Who was this guy? Monday, he tailed the sedan when it returned. It led him downtown, parking outside City Hall. The suit guy went in, badge flashing at the door. Mark's stomach sank. Linda had a friend in the city, someone high enough to stonewall him. He called Greg that night. City Hall guy, Mark said. Suit, badge. Met Linda twice. Greg whistled. That's your link. Could be a planner, a clerk, someone with sway. Get his name, and we've got her. Mark spent the week playing detective. He caught the sedan's plate, ran it through a public records site, registered to a Paul Whitaker, senior zoning official. Bingo. Linda wasn't just HOA muscle. She had a puppet at City Hall. He told Greg, who grinned over the phone. Game changer, Greg said. We'll subpoena his records if it comes to it. But first, hit her where it hurts, the HOA. Mark agreed. He'd expose her racket, But he needed more than accusations. He needed a weapon. That's when he found it. Late Wednesday, bleary-eyed, poring over the bylaws. Section 14A, property owners may charge fees for maintenance, access, or usage of personally owned spaces deemed community assets. If Linda called his driveway community property, he could charge for it. Legally. He laughed, a sharp, victorious sound. Linda had handed him the key to her downfall. He'd turn her scam into his triumph and make her pay. Mark woke Thursday morning with a fire in his belly. Section 14A of the HOA bylaws was his golden ticket. Property owners may charge fees for maintenance, access, or usage of personally owned spaces deemed community assets. Linda had declared his driveway community property to justify her parking racket, but she'd overlooked or ignored this loophole. If it was community, he could charge for it. Legally. He'd turn her scam into his weapon and watch her choke on it. He spent the day preparing. He ordered a foldable parking arm gate from Amazon, next day delivery, thank God, and hit the hardware store for supplies, a sturdy wooden base, paint, bolts, a motion-activated security camera. He sketched a sign on graph paper. Community parking fee, $50 per day. Violators towed. Private property. $50 was steep, but it matched Linda's greed and gave him room to negotiate or intimidate. By evening, he'd built a makeshift toll booth, a folding table with a canopy, bolted to the gate base at the end of his driveway. He painted the sign in bold red letters, mounted it on a post, and wired the camera to his phone. It wasn't pretty, but it screamed authority. Friday, he set it up at dawn. The gray SUV was still there, but no new cars had arrived yet. He locked the gate arm down, blocking access, and waited. The first test came at 7 a.m. The green van guy pulled up, brakes squealing as he spotted the setup. He climbed out, goatee twitching, and stared at the sign. "What the hell's this?" he called, waving at the toll booth. Mark stepped onto his porch, arms folded. New HOA-approved parking policy. "You want to park? $50 a day." The guy laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You're nuts." Linda said it's free. Linda lied, Mark said. Bylaw 14A, community spaces can be charged for. Pay up or move. Goatee guy snapped photos with his phone, muttering, then drove off. Mark grinned. Round one his. But he knew Linda would hear about it fast. She did. By 8:30, she stormed across the street, face red, cardigan flapping like a war banner. "What is this?" she screeched, jabbing a finger at the sign. "Just following the rules," Mark said, leaning against his doorframe. "You made my driveway community property, right? Well, I'm charging for it. Bylaw 14A, look it up." Her jaw dropped, then snapped shut. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can," he said, pulling out a printed copy of the bylaws, 14A highlighted. "You voted it in. Now it's a paid lot." She stared at the paper, seething, then whipped out her phone. "This isn't over." She dialed, pacing as she barked orders to someone. Tom, Susan, her city crony. Mark couldn't tell. He didn't care. The camera caught every second of her meltdown. By noon, the chaos spread. The convertible woman pulled up, read the sign, and cursed loud enough for Mrs. Henderson's dog to bark. She paid, slamming two 20s and a 10 on the table, grumbling about extortion. Mark unlocked the gate, pocketed the cash, and waved her in. $50 in hand felt like victory. The black SUV guy came next, argued for 10 minutes, then paid too. By day's end, Mark had $150 and a growing sense of control. Linda fought back Saturday. An email from the HOA's lawyer, a greasy type named Harold Vance, landed in Mark's inbox. "Remove the toll booth immediately. You're violating community aesthetics and imposing unauthorized fees. Legal action pending." Mark laughed, forwarding it to Greg. "They're bluffing," Greg said over the phone. "You're within the bylaws. Send them this." He dictated a response, and Mark typed it up. "Per bylaw 14A, I'm legally charging for community use of my property. Attached, maintenance costs, towing rights. Proceed at your risk." He included an invoice, $200 for gravel, $50 for paint, $100 for the camera, plus a towing clause. He hit send, adrenaline pumping. The lawyer backed off by Monday. No reply, no threats. Linda's bluff had crumbled. Mark enforced the toll harder. Tuesday, the rusty pickup guy tried parking without paying. Mark called Big Mike's, and the truck was gone in 20 minutes. Linda watched from her porch, arms crossed, helpless. The camera caught her glaring, a bonus for later. Neighbors took notice. Mr. Patel stopped by Wednesday, chuckling. You've got guts, Mark. Linda's losing it. Mrs. Henderson slipped him $20 through her fence. For the cause, she winked. A quiet guy down the street, Jim, offered to testify if it went to court. She fined me for my shed last year, he muttered. Hate her guts. Mark had allies now, a small rebellion brewing. Thursday, Linda escalated. Sirens wailed at dusk as a police cruiser rolled up. Linda stood beside it, smug, pointing at the toll booth. Officer Daniels, a stocky cop with a buzz cut, stepped out, notepad in hand. Evening, Daniels said. Got a complaint about extortion. Mark smiled, unfazed. No extortion, officer. This is my driveway, private property. HOA called it community space, so I'm charging per their bylaws. Linda jumped in, voice shrill. He's blocking access. It's illegal. Daniels frowned. Ma'am, is this his property? Yes, but Linda stammered. Then he can charge for access, Daniels said, cutting her off. Like a private lot. Looks legal to me. He turned to Linda. And using his land without permission? That's trespassing. Careful, ma'am. Linda's face went white. Mark put back a laugh as Daniels tipped his hat and drove off. Linda screeched, stomping her foot, screaming about respect and defiance. Neighbors filmed it, Jim from his porch, Mrs. Henderson from her window. By morning, the video was viral on the Facebook group, captioned, HOA Linda loses it. Mark leaned back that night, $300 richer, the toll booth humming with success. Linda was cracking, her control slipping. But he knew she'd hit back harder. He was ready. Friday morning, Mark woke to a certified letter from Harold Vance. The HOA was suing him, claiming he'd violated policy, demanding $5,000 in damages, threatening foreclosure if he didn't comply. He laughed, the audacity flooring him. They'd overplayed their hand, and he had Greg. He met Greg at the diner Saturday, dumping the letter on the table. Greg skimmed it, grinning. They're desperate. This is a scare tactic, weak as hell. We countersue. For what? Mark asked. Property rights violation, harassment, legal fees, Greg said. But we've got bigger fish. That cash racket? Let's dig into their finances. If she's skimming parking money, she's skimming elsewhere. Mark nodded. She's got a city guy, Paul Whitaker. Zoning official. Met her twice. Greg's eyes lit up. Perfect. We subpoena their records. Let's bury her. They filed Monday, Mark versus Willow Creek HOA, seeking damages and an injunction to reclaim his driveway. Greg requested HOA financials and discovery, a long shot that paid off fast. Tuesday, an anonymous email hit Mark's inbox. Check the maintenance fund. No name, no context, but Mark forwarded it to Greg. Wednesday, Greg called, voice electric. Jackpot. Their books are a mess, tens of thousands missing. Maintenance payments to his shell company, fake invoices, waived fees for board members. It's embezzlement. Who's he? Mark asked. Whistleblower, Greg said. Probably scared. We'll find them. Thursday, she found them. Emily Carter, former HOA treasurer, knocked on Mark's door at dusk, a nervous brunette clutching a USB drive. I'm E, she said. I quit last year, couldn't stomach it. Linda's been stealing for years. This is proof. Mark took the drive, stunned. Why now? She's ruining you, Emily said. Like she ruined me, find me out of my savings. I've got bank statements, emails. She's done. Friday, Greg filed an amended suit, adding fraud and embezzlement, attaching Emily's evidence. The HOA crumbled fast. Tom resigned overnight. Susan stopped answering calls. Neighbors turned on Linda, demanding audits at an emergency meeting Saturday. She tried to spin it, blaming Mark, playing victim, but Emily stood up, USB in hand. I've got records, Emily said. She stole $50,000, fake repairs, her friends consulting. It's all here. The room exploded. Linda was voted out, banned from the HOA for life. Monday, the original lawsuit collapsed. The HOA settled, cutting Mark a $10,000 check for fees and damages. He used it to erect a massive private property sign, grinning as it went up. Linda was cornered, her empire ash. But Mark wasn't done watching her fall. Linda's downfall unfolded like a slow-motion crash. After the HOA ouster, she tried to lay low, avoiding neighbors' glares. Kids on bikes chanted, "HOA Linda," as she shuffled to her mailbox. Jim hung a "No Linda Allowed" sign on his fence. Her reputation was toast. Viral videos, fraud headlines in the local paper, whispers at every barbecue. She snapped one day, screaming at a group of teens from her porch, and they filmed it too. By fall, a for sale sign sprouted on her lawn. Mark watched, smug, as she struggled to sell. Willow Creek's drama had gone national, Reddit threads, a podcast episode, and buyers balked. Her pristine colonial sat empty, price slashed from $400,000 to $300,000, then $250,000. No takers. Legal fees piled up. Her city pal Paul Whitaker was under investigation, dragging her into depositions. Neighbors shunned her. Her reign was dead. Spring brought the twist. Linda sold at a loss, $200,000, to a college kid named Tyler, a lanky frat boy with a pickup full of speakers. He turned her house into an Airbnb party pad, weekend raggers, bass thumping, tourists spilling beer on her once spotless lawn. Mark walked past one day, saw her drive by, staring at the chaos in horror. He waved, grinning. "Enjoy your shared space, Linda." She glared, sped off, and vanished from Willow Creek. Mark's driveway was his again. Quiet, car-free, a triumph etched in gravel. Justice, poetic and loud, was served.